All right, good. So very delighted to be back to the Faculty of Education. Very delighted also with the opportunity. Many thanks to Professor Nancy Lowe and SITE as well to host me again. And you're never getting bored of me, so so it's really nice of you. Today I'm going to talk about something I've been passionate for almost 20 years. That's self-regulated learning. I guess because I've been always focused on that and always realized the importance of having skills to learn. And somebody who navigated through higher education never enjoyed to go to too many lectures, but rather to study on my own. Problem-solving support services that was run by MIT and Stanford. And what they found in that particular study was that productivity of the novice workers increased for about 35%, while experienced workers do not benefit at all from the use of generative AI. There are also studies in some other disciplines. My home discipline is computer science. So software engineering demonstrated also increases to almost 50% in productivity while maintaining the same quality of the code that they were producing. At the same time, we know that generative AI can hallucinate. It's full of falsehoods, doesn't have the notion of the truthfulness, doesn't have the concept of what is the truth and what is a fact. So that's basically something that we need to deal with. So one of the key things is, actually I need to point this, but I'm going to use the mouse as well. So is that we really need to think about the ways how we can empower the learners for the age of AI. Interesting, almost more than 3 years ago, George Siemens and I had this opinion pieces in a major Australian newspaper, which is called The Age, and that basically is also the Sydney Morning Herald and several others, in which we pretty much anticipated all these skills by seeing that AI is coming. I wish some of the policymakers were listening. A year ago as well about calling for this. To me, what is the key point for this is that we need to build adaptive learners. The learners who can deal with the speed of change of the things that AI is accelerating. So in different professions, you will need to have access to different types of tools. And the more advanced and sophisticated tools you have, you can produce even more sophisticated and advanced tools. So that's basically kind of why that acceleration is required. While we are talking in Australia and working with a group of almost 20 academics on the whole concept of adaptive skills and knowledge, and there are many of them that we will be unpacking. One of them that we are very carefully hiding with a new term is called self-regulated learning. The self-regulated learning is the key skill. When I talk about learning, human learning, I always talk about self-regulated learning. Because we are always, no matter how much somebody is guiding, we are deciding how much attention we're going to pay. We are deciding whether we are going to associate that information we are currently reading with some other information that we know from our prior knowledge. Or whether we are going to use the highlighting, whether we are also going to try to practice what we've just learned in a few days. It's really our decision in most of the cases what is happening there. And to me, that's the fundamental notion of the really kind of the skill of learning to learn. And that ability to learn independently is quite essential in that repertoire of the things that we need to have as self-regulated learners. In today's talk specifically, I want to talk about how we can use AI in learning analytics to help us enhance self-regulated learning skills for the age of AI. So in a way, we are using AI to help us to develop human skills so that they can deal with the changes and uncertainties that AI is also bringing. So in a way, we are part of that vicious cycle that we are surrounded by AI. And specifically, I will also drill into the platform we've been developing for several years. We call it FLoRA. And two of my wonderful colleagues here, Ija Fan from Peking University and Xin Yu Li from Monash are also with me here, who are really the main brain power and under the rules of the project. So what we basically want to take away, and I usually like to say this. Number one is that learning to learn abilities require urgent attention. Learners need to be equipped with these skills. Number two, that there's a very complex relationship between self-regulated learning skills and AI. While AI can help learners to perform or learn in certain situations much better, it may also create certain types of dependencies or limit the extent to which learners are engaged into the monitoring of their own learning. And therefore, they are really not becoming so good at developing their own judgments about how effectively they can make decisions that are quite important. And number three is that teachers now, in the age of AI, will probably have even more work to do rather than less. I'm not really a person who believes that teachers' role will go away, because teachers will need to create a design the tasks for the learners that are incorporating AI. I'd like to say that teachers need to create scaffolding for the learners to engage with AI-based scaffolds. So in a way, scaffold will be AI scaffold. So it's quite actually an interesting thing, but hopefully it will become also clear finally. So, few foundations. First part, we'll just try to introduce two key ideas behind self-regulated learning and one implication of it. And then also we'll talk about specific issues that are related to AI. So number one is that learners are those who construct the knowledge that they are trying to learn. And that construction of knowledge, when learners are interacting with certain information, they always use particular repertoire of learning strategies. They read, understanding of the information that they are trying to work on. And that's really important. Literature on learning strategies is fairly rich. There are many other names that are often known. Some call them learning techniques. Others call them learning tactics, although there is some granularity difference between these. I particularly appreciate the work that John Dalmosky did in the US and also another person, Robert York. John Dalmosky did a very thorough systematic approach. What is that toolbox of the things that learners need to look at in the schools and beyond, and identify certain types of learning approaches? For example, self-testing practice or delayed practice. Rather than to do everything now, try to practice certain things with a delay, or try to interweave certain practice that learners need to take, so that you basically, when you are introducing some new information, try to also rehearse some of the information that you learned before. And then also some of them that are quite promising as well, that is called elaborative interrogation, which is basically asking learners about the concept they are trying to learn, also to always generate questions, how and why. Or for the learners to self-explain as well certain information, also shown to be quite useful. Rereading, obviously reading is, we need to kind of re-access particular information, but it's not particularly potent learning strategy. They often say that all these airlines that are giving us this drill about what we'll do in the state of emergency, once if they asked us to go through that drill, things, but beyond that, you need to engage into some of these different other types of strategies. One thing that we know, however, from the literature, and it's been studied across many places, is that learners have very limited repertoire of learning strategies. That is to say, many learners use very ineffective learning strategies. Can you imagine which is the most popular learning strategy at some of the top US universities? Reading and rereading. And that's basically what is happening consistently, time and again. Instead of, for example, self-test or flashcards, or even to use some of the kind of highlighting that is a good starting point and so on. So then the first implication, I identified a small icon to make Ijo happy as well. He said, Dragan, you don't have many visuals on your slides, so people may get bored. So I found this sign means apparently icons for implications. And so what really kind of key point I want to emphasize is that with respect to learning strategies, we need to equip the learners to be able to select, master, and use most effective learning strategies in collaboration also with AI. So that's really the key change. You could say, Dragan, what is new here? Well, this part is new because now they need to work with AI. Conceptualization of that, even if you are talking about the kind of theoretical contributions in research, but also practical contributions as teachers who are doing or at the front line, they need to think about what do we mean by all these learning strategies when it comes down this kind of toxic or positive ingredient called AI. The second point I want to make, David, if you want to take a photo. Number two is that learners are agents who use own judgments to make decisions about their own learning. So whatever time, somebody even kind of, they limit you, like, you need to follow these steps when you're learning. You're still going to make your own decisions whether I want to pay attention to what I'm reading or not. How carefully I am connecting that information that I'm reading with my prior knowledge. I'm using that to make my own decisions and make the choices afterwards. So for example, if learners think that they studied something, that they know something really well, although they don't, and they are poor at judgments of their own learning, they will stop studying, although they are not really still mastering the thing that they are trying to master. That's really one of the key things. And what we also know from the literature, consistently, especially with respect to the reading comprehension, learners are highly inaccurate. When I say learners, I mean human beings, all of us, are highly inaccurate at judging their own learning. There are a number of different strategies that can be used to improve and enhance judgment of learning. But consistently across many studies, there was a relatively old study as well that I was looking into that was showing that correlation between students' predictions of how well they know something versus how much they actually know for that same item was less than 0.3 correlation. So we are really highly unreliable when it comes down to some of these things. So then this becomes even worse when we get to deal with generative AI. How do we make these judgments? Generative AI is hallucinating, but in a very articulate, confident way, right? So we are seeing these type of things, and when you are reading, and our eyes, and there are even studies showing that learners or readers in general are actually going much quicker to the information now that is produced by generative AI because it's so fluent, so articulate, and they are not paying sufficient attention to what they are actually reading. And therefore, they are actually almost on a kind of, you can say, on an autopilot. And that leads into what I call lazy metacognition. Right? Learners are not lazy, but in a way that information looks so fluent, as actually almost crippling our cognitive and metacognitive tools to master and deeply engage with the information. Third thing I want to say is that self-regulated learning is also really tightly connected with information seeking. We need to find a good and reliable source of information. We also need to know whether that information is trustworthy or not. Often learners are these days in the so-called inquiry-based pedagogies asked to seek for information on a topic they don't know anything about. In the literature, that's documented as sense-making paradox, because learners do not know even what is a good information about that. They don't know what are good judgments that they can identify as part of the process. And then that has even more profound implications for generative AI. because generative AI makes things up. And there was a recent study that was comparing whether ChatGPT will take over some of the function answering forums that are available on the internet. In software engineering, that's well-known Stack Overflow, but I'm sure you've heard of Stack Exchange, and there are many things even for parenting, for statistics, for many places. People go there. It's super well-known. So what was basically study showing is that 77% of the responses of ChatGPT was deemed by metrics that are coming from linguistics verbose. 52% of the responses had some falsehood. And almost 40% of the participants in that given study, that is a relatively brand new study, preferred ChatGPT over the reliable source of information that is community also validated. And mostly under the excuse that ChatGPT looks so articulate and so sleek. That's basically the kind of the key point that is out there available. New context with the use of AI. To me, that's basically the second key component that is quite important for us about the skills of learning to learn in the age of AI. So when we are talking about that, we then basically want to ask ourselves, why learners do not have these sufficiently developed skills, regardless of AI? There's lots of research on that. Some of research says that our curriculum from K-12 into the universities never introduces the skills to study. Occasionally, some schools, and for those teachers who are in this and who are actually promoting and teaching some of these things, kudos, but you are in minority. That's number one. Number two, is also really difficult for teachers to get the granular understanding about how much and how well their learners are actually able to learn. And they often don't have granular data. You need to have that granular data, and therefore it's really hard also to get sufficiently personalized feedback that can be offered to the students, and then students can push back to that feedback as well to engage to what they would call dialogic feedback. So we don't have that kind of discourse or dialogue that is happening between the learners and other learners or educators that is actually with respect to these learning strategies. All right, so this is basically kind of the general foundations that I had to talk about. And now I'm going to actually transition to this platform that we use to do two things. To explore how students are actually engaging in self-regulated learning, to support self-regulated learning, and potentially improve self-regulated learning and long-term also outcomes of our learners. So what we really are trying to do, we are using data about students' interaction with the online digital tools and the information they are dealing with, and to turn that data into personalized feedback for supporting learning to learn. That's basically simple task what we are trying to do. So how we are doing that, and that's basically the kind of the process, and this is the diagram that represents the whole field of learning analytics. Well, we first want to get some data. And basically what we do with that data is that you can also, I'm referring to here to the police. And some of you know of the police, this song, Every Breath You Take, right? So we don't really record every breath you take, although some in the field would like also to get that. But we are actually taking any step you take or any move of the mouse also you make. So we are trying to record these type of data about students' interactions with the digital technologies. So that's basically what we are trying to do on that level. Then once we have collected lots and lots of data, one student within 1 hour, when each gives them all his machinery that he likes to collect the data about, can have hundreds of thousands of data points or even millions of data points about the learner. So then we want to basically analyze these we call them temporal levels, because learning is very dynamic. Learners might be going well, reading 3 or 4 sentences or a whole page, and then they realize on the following page, something's inconsistent. That's the triggering of their metacognition, of their metacognitive monitoring, because they identify discrepancy. And we basically want to identify these processes of self-regulated learning when students are metacognitively monitored, when they evaluate or judge their own learning, when they are also organizing some of the information they are dealing with, when they are planning, when they are orienting, and so on. So we want to understand these processes and their relationships. And the final thing is we want to provide just-in-time personalized support for the learners as part of the process. So that's basically in a nutshell what we are trying to do with the FLoRA engine. So specifically, the FLoRA itself is a tool, and I'll give you very detailed, lots of screenshots I have for you, so don't worry. I'm not talking about some mystic project problem somewhere there. It's really supporting learning to learn in comprehension and writing tasks. Comprehension for the time being has been primarily focused in our cases on reading. However, we also have video as well, and students can But I want to also give you additional framework as well, how we are trying to do certain things in FLoRA. This is the work that my dear colleague at Radboud University in Monash is developing. And it's the framework that basically is introducing hybrid human AI regulation. Hybrid human AI regulation basically is coming from this promise that potentially sometimes learners need to completely offload decision-making and the choices to the AI, because they don't have that kind of cognitive and metacognitive repertoire of operations and strategies they can apply, and they can use it. But then the ultimate goal, in my view, is to get our learners to be self-regulated learners, where potentially they can use AI to help them observe and reflect further, thinking of way as a sport or as an athlete, when they are reflecting on their sports performance, as well how they can also further improve certain things in collaboration with AI. All right. So I'm now going to go into very specific with the FLoRA platform, and there'll be lots of screenshots in the next several slides. So the FLoRA platform itself is having this very specific toolkit. It's really designed at the moment sits on Moodle, but it's designed, and our ultimate goal is to have FLoRA to be a browser plugin. So all these operations that you can see, and I'm going to be talking about, the idea is that you can just basically be doing them anywhere on the web. This thing sits with you, and you want to basically do all these operations. It has this on the kind of right-hand side of your browser. It'll be just this small palette that'll be shown on every page you open, and it's on you. So it has the tools that are supporting annotation. It has the tools that are supporting, that are scaffolding the learners to take and engage into particular learning strategies. Also help the learners to write essays, supports learners as well to plan their learning, and also has team. Relatively trivial things like the timer tool as well, so the students can time how and when they are doing certain things. So let us basically just look in terms of these kind of annotation, simple annotation things. Learners can
This
engage.
meeting is being recorded. It's recording. It's okay.
It's recording again. Okay. So there's some of these reading tools. Fortunately, the resolution of this projector is not great, but I'm happy to share the slides so you can actually see better later. And then learners can have many different highlights. Each highlight may have a particular meaning. Meaning, for example, and the teachers themselves can define what is the meaning of these highlights, where each highlight may receive a color. For example, we draw lots of our work in achievement goal orientation theory, which basically is distinguishing between mastery and performance orientations of the students. And in those cases, for example, when something is interesting, it's more kind of connected to mastery orientation, particularly approach mastery that we have. Something can be also important to get a good grade. So that could be another type. And students can easily have these tags for them. But by them making those decisions, what to highlight or not, and assigning these tags, they're also showing us their judgments of their own learning and what they think it's important or confusing and everything else. Not only can we use that information to inform some of the scaffolding, we can also equip and pass that information to the teachers, and they can cover that with their students, especially the confusing parts. But then that information can be easily searched for by learners. So in a way that the time they invest to highlight, etc., they can easily then navigate through the entire system and find, oh, I said something was important, where was that? Okay, I can easily find it, it's there. But then we also, for the learners, have, and some teachers like that, to have a planner tool. And the planner tool allows the learners to compose or choose to compose their own or choose existing predefined learning strategy. So typically that means, for example, we identified in our research some of these reading and writing strategies. I'm going to talk about them in a few minutes later. But then they can actually say, I want to read first, and I'm going to spend on particular parts so much time to read, and then later on, I want to spend so much time on writing and so on. That might seem trivial for many people in this room because you are all with either PhD or working on towards PhD. However, imagine a learner who is pretty confused. They don't know what is really the amount of time they need to spend to learn, etc., especially in school setting. That could be a quite useful tool that your teacher can even use this as a form of a scaffold for them to support them in their learning. Then we also have the scaffolding tool. This is the scaffolding tool that is monitoring all these students' interactions with the FLoRA system, and then recommends what exactly to take as the next step. For example, the system noticed that students really didn't see the overview or description of the task. And early in a learning task, it wants to suggest them to take some more time to pay attention to kind of orient themselves, what is really required, and so on. So that would be one way to scaffold for the learners. Learners, based on that, they can pick some of that information, create a checklist, and they can actually work towards that checklist. So this is not really so much AI so far. However, we can also provide that scaffold by using the content of the documents learners are working on. We also have our prior research. So we basically create these giant, big prompts that are talking about learners that are engaging in orienting early in the stages of their task. And we found that, for example, they have processes that are kind of related association, large association with the outcomes that are important. And so then we actually generate these scaffolds for the learners. And then it becomes like a natural language that is providing the learners with a suggestion what to do next. In certain situations, although we did not prescribe it, but we pumped into GPT the content that learners are using, provide this case, and it started giving us examples about use of predictive modeling during COVID times, etc. So in a way, behave relatively intelligently as well. Ultimate goal for us is that we want to basically learners to discuss with GPT as well. So that it becomes basically a fairly dialogic approach. It suggests them these type of things, and the learners can push back or negotiate what needs to be done next. FLoRA, and I'm going to talk later about that as well. We support multiple languages. Can anybody guess which language is this? Chinyu, you don't have a right to vote. Finnish, exactly. So this is in Finnish, because we basically have lots of people who are using it in Finnish. So Finnish is a very specific, peculiar language, but it's GPT technology, relatively easy to support. Second side of FLoRA is to support writing tasks. It has basically the kind of this sliding editor that students basically can easily overlay what they are doing. And then it has a bunch of tools. One of these tools is based on GPT, just simple grammar. So it can give them certain suggestions on grammar, how and what are the issues and how they can improve. We also have another one that is not necessarily based on GPT, but it's based on formal academic writing. So in a way, what kind of vocabulary learners want to have. And that's what we call in AI is knowledge engineers. So we have an expert who had more than 20 years of teaching of academic writing and supports that. Originality is not particularly exciting, even Turnitin can do it, so it's not really what we want, but it's basically implemented there. But what is nice as well is this color coding that this resolution doesn't allow you to appreciate and to see is actually looking into the rhetorical moves of the extent to which students are integrating certain information in each sentence. From very simple remembering of the information that they are reading to very high levels of elaboration and creation of some new information. So it's quite actually connected with this idea that I was initially talking about, that learners need to be able to apply and create new information with the support of AI. So this is basically how that looks. So, and then there are different color codes and the learners can actually reflect on the quality, you're right.
So the color coding is really based on the Bloom's taxonomy.
Bloom's taxonomy, yes.
Yeah. And so it's sort of looking at the connectives, and so say, for example, at the lowest level, then it's like
Just recalling a fact.
just recalling.
Yeah, exactly. And we just basically bundle, instead of having 6 colors, we have only 3 levels. We bundle 2 and 2 and 2 levels. And then we have ChatGPT. So learners don't have to go to ChatGPT. It's embedded. So they can just basically slide on the right-hand side of their screen, pop small little window, and it's ChatGPT. But obviously, we know every interaction that students will have with ChatGPT in this way. Any kind of request they send, any information they will copy into their essay, everything. We know that, I mean, it's not developed as a surveillance tool, it's developed as a tool for us to understand how they're learning and also to help them to actually use better ChatGPT as well in certain situations. And then the tool itself, and this is the final thing, has something also for the teachers. Help them to assess students on essays. So this is basically automating the things for the teachers and allowing for many things to do. There are many other things that are supporting inside of FLoRA for teachers, how they configure many of these tools. They can choose which of these functionalities they want their students to use inside of their classes. They can do also certain types of analytics, but we'll also have more discussion because we need to work even more with teachers, especially in schools, to design exactly types of analytics that would be useful for them to inform their practice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a little bit of impact of FLoRA and this type of approach to support learning. So first, FLoRA has been so far used in secondary and higher education. And you can see that I'm even hinting primary is on the horizon. We hope in the next 6 months, we'll go into the primary schools, but I don't think that FLoRA is suitable for children younger than 10 years. Skills is happening between ages 12 and 15. So we really don't want to kind of go into the too young kids to support FLoRA. FLoRA already supports multiple languages. At least we can relatively quickly support any other language because ChatGPT is allowing us to support it. So we've done lots of work in Dutch, English, Finnish, German, Mandarin, Spanish. And Spanish and Portuguese are something we just recently started, but it's supporting, and we'll have several of our partners working with schools in Colombia and Brazil. And then we are preparing Arabic as well in the next few months to work in that language. So you can see that FLoRA has been spreading across the board. So in Europe, 3 different countries, Germany, Finland, and the Netherlands. Also, in India, and then we have also in Australia. So that's basically kind of a footprint of FLoRA that is expanding. Then the other important thing is to say is like what kind of subjects it has been used. Language learning, it's been also used in communications classes, it's been used in biology, it's been used in IT, it's been used in data science. It's been used in relatively smaller classrooms with 18 to 20 students in secondary schools, but it's been used in very large higher education classes with enrollments in some of the amazing universities with more than close to 300 students, and now we have also Monash with close to 400 students who are using this. So in a way, it tells you the range where FLoRA can be used. So what we found so far, I'm going to talk about, again, around learning strategies and around judgments of learning, as well as I initially had this framework. First of all, it allows us to identify effective ways to track and influence learning strategies with FLoRA. That's one thing that we want to do. So we basically are doing this in multiple different studies. This is one of these in which students were asked to learn about AI in education or AI, different types of applications of AI across the board. And you can see that the content can be also with different visuals and videos. What we found is, as I previously mentioned as well, is that consistently in secondary and higher education, in these comprehension and writing tasks, students are generally having three learning strategies. One strategy is that learners basically have read first the content and then write next. Makes sense? But some learners are also reading and writing simultaneously. And then finally, some learners are writing intensely, but then read very selectively, don't read at all. And so what we found is basically that this first learning strategy is the most potent one. So it has moderate to large effect sizes on the scores of the students' essays. So that's really important thing. Number two is also this write intensely and read selectively is actually used by two groups of learners. Those who have very high level of prior knowledge, and they really are just basically they are not in need to read much. And then those who really don't want to read. And they're basically kind of fairly lost. So what we also found is that through these type of scaffolds, we found moderate association with the choices that students are making about their actual learning strategies. So in a way, I'm not trying to make a causal claim, but through this association, we see that there's strong potential for these type of studies, for these type of tools that are actually influencing potentially good choices for students to improve their learning strategy. So we had actually a randomized control trial and show the moderate effect size on the association between scaffolding that we implemented through AI and learning strategy. Also recently, I said our GPT scaffolds are going to schools. So we are running currently a study that involves 6 countries. And these scaffolds look pretty much like this. Students are learning about AI in medicine, and they are basically getting all these different pieces of information about how they can improve their learning and their learning strategies. We are basically trying to compare that between not providing these scaffolds at all, providing these scaffolds where students are taking some, when we are taking some information about their process, and also when we are taking some information about their process and the prior knowledge and some other attributes, what they are doing. So talk to me in a few months when we get the results of this study. Another type of work that we are doing with respect to the students' learning strategies and improvement is in collaboration with Inge Molenaar and the Dutch AI lab in education, which is probably one of the largest in the world. And they're basically quite keen to explore the idea of the dashboards when they are visualizing these self-regulated learning processes that students are engaging, but also through different personas. So in a way, the extent to which particular persona can help them with the types of actions and the types of learning approaches they are taking to improve some of their learning strategies. All right, second thing, I spoke. Peking University, and in which Ija wanted to say, all right, We developed in FLoRA lots of these tools. So can we randomize students? So we first ask students to work on an essay for about 2 hours. Got a little bit of a break, and then 1 hour to then revise these essays. And in these additional 1 hour, students were randomized into 4 conditions. 1, there was a control, no support of any in our intelligent tools. 2, they had access to GPT, to chat. 3, they had access to a chat to this nice German person who was basically answering all their questions in real time. It's incredible that EJ managed to have somebody who was basically available to chat with about 40 students for 1 hour each. So full time. And then the final thing is these, we call these checklist tools, where we are basically highlighting students, etc. What we found is radically. So when students were not using our checklist tools and any of these things, when we asked them how well their essay was on the criteria of the rubric versus the actual performance, correlation was almost minus 0.5. So which means students completely missed it. And the longer they spend on the writing task, the higher their overconfidence was. However, for the learners who had our checklist tools, their correlation was positive 0.5. So you can see it's complete flip in the correlation and became far more useful in judging. However, this is really important implication for us if you're studying self-regulated learning and learning to learn in the age of AI. Students' locus of control, that is to say, the extent to which students felt responsible for any mistakes that they still existed inside of their essay, they did not take any responsibility, they blamed the tool. It's not me, it's the tool. I'm sure many teachers will also be associating with that. The other thing is with respect to the quality of the essays. You will not be surprised that ChatGPT condition had by far the highest performance on the quality of the essay from what you're asking. And other 3 conditions, they had no significant differences between each other. However, EJ did this beautiful part, and I'm going to do, this is the only part that will be a bit more technical, did really this deep analysis of how students were metacognitively monitoring their own learning. And so what we found is that students who were chatting with the human teacher, they had much deeper metacognitive engagement with information and help-seeking activities, whereas students who were just using the ChatGPT. And you can see this very complex chart. This complex chart is mapping out different types of processes of self-regulated learning that we identify through these clicks and mouse movements and everything else. And you can see that these very red ones, these connections, represent those that students who were in the ChatGPT conditions had much stronger. And those that represent green ones are those who were in a condition where they were chatting with a human expert. So you can see that really this big loop here that is happening between students elaborating and organizing, which is really the writing, and just other, and this other is engaging and chatting with the ChatGPT. While the students who, and then they were also basically just kind of doing a bit of planning, first reading, and that was basically the only thing that they were doing. However, students who were in this human conditions, they were chatting with other human being on the other side. What they were doing is basically they were engaging, first of all, in writing, and then first reading. Reading a little bit, writing, reading a little bit, and writing. And then the other thing what they were doing is also, they were basically orienting themselves about their learning, and then also metacognitively analyzing how well they are doing, right? They were engaging into the judgments of their own learning. And then finally, what they were doing is also they were planning and then chatting with the teacher, and then again, trying to orient themselves. So in a way, they were doing lots of these decisions on their own as part of the process. Ija went even further to see how exactly students were doing these chats with the teacher and in terms of the help seeking. So in a way, he was unpacking this black box. And then when he was doing that, when students were doing that with ChatGPT, the process was a bit messy in terms of diagnosing what questions they would have to ask, then what kind of object they would ask that question about, and then ask the help for, and then evaluate whether that help was useful or not, and then processing that help in a way, implementing whatever information they got from the help. And what we basically found is that in almost 50% of the cases, they would get some help from ChatGPT, they would just implement it. They would not even judge it at all. No judgment, no evaluation, nothing, just basically engaging into the evaluation. In a way, it is a judgmental learning or evaluative judgment as part of the process. So in a way, that tells us that we need to really think about long-term implications of the students engaging with some of these AI tools. Because if students are not evaluating what they are doing, if students are not engaging in meta-cognitive monitoring, what kind of lessons they can learn, how reliable they can be as well when the chatbot is just giving them potential falsehoods. What they are doing as part of the process, it's really significant. But people are really good to kind of think about some of these things as they're going there. The other important thing is also that we need to think about how and what are the potential other inadvertent effects on human learning as we are going through that. We just published one study in collaboration with colleagues at the University of Queensland, in which they basically, the study which showed that once we removed some of these AI-based scaffolds, students didn't learn how to learn better. So it's a really kind of a delicate balance that we need to have. But we cannot ignore it because we know that students are going to use some of these AI tools. So in a way, we need to come up with even better types of interventions, how we are actually increasing the students' arsenal or the toolkit of the learning strategies and improving their own judgments, while at the same time, we are also giving them access to very sophisticated types of tools. And I'm wrapping up my talk with a few key remarks I want to make. First one is that we can see that AI can have profound implications on learning to learn skills, and by extension, also self-regulated learning. Number two is that AI is very unlikely to go away. Something really weird needs to happen. But then we in education, we need to take the charge. We should not be expecting that big corporations that are generating this AI will tell us how to use this AI for human learning. And we need to be able, part of our adaptive learner is also to be able to push back against the AI and get the AI that is needed for them and us as educators as well to get the AI that we need. And that basically brings me to another point, is that teachers really need to be central as part of this process. They need to think about and engage in the type of tasks that AI can be introduced and how it can be introduced. I know that many teachers are confused how to do that. It's not a small ask, but that's why we have world leaders in learning design like Professor Nancy, who can actually co-design these things with the teachers and help us all to basically get some of these patterns and the approaches that are most effectively integrating AI into the process. And the final thing I'm going to say is that we really need to have much more future research and practice, for that matter, to understand the longitudinal effects of AI on learning to learn skills and, by extension, self-regulated learning. And on that note, thanks so much for your attention, and happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much for a very inspiring and quite thoughtful talk. So maybe I will give preference to our on-site audience first to ask questions. Yes, David.
Thanks very much, Dragan. That's a fantastic talk, and it's so good to see you here again. And thanks very much, Nancy, for setting it up. So my question or comment is around the making judgment issue. I mean, I guess we've always known in education that the capacity for students to make informed judgments are a critical part of learning. And I guess conventionally, we sometimes gave them some samples or exemplars to analyze, and then we tried to surface their judgment processes and then maybe try to calibrate them against those of the teachers. So I'm wondering if you have any strategies for educators to try to teach maybe in a whole class context, maybe something relatively accessible that many teachers could do in many disciplines and many situations. Any thoughts on how we could try to scaffold or enhance students' capacities to make appropriate judgments in the context of generative AI? And, I'm wondering whether we could maybe ask a similar question to 2 different Gen AI tools and then try and do some comparison, and whether we can put students in groups and then try to surface the kind of decision-making. Do you have any thoughts on these kind of issues?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. There are lots of great questions. You packed also many questions in there as well, but it's really good because we need to think about so many of these different types of things. I want to take the first part, which I think it's slightly easier one. That is to say how teachers potentially can, help students to improve some of their judgments. I think going back again to the list of the learning techniques or so-called desirable difficulties, it's important to think about. There are 2 of them that are actually shown to work across many disciplines, I think almost any. One is self-explanations. So asking students to self-explain certain types of things. And that's basically something Kurt Van Laan was working on. There's a meta-analysis that shows well above the average if you take Hadid's classification of effect sizes. So this one effect size is 0.6 with students' learning outcomes. So in a way, the idea is asking students to evaluate that by themselves, explain to themselves. That's one. The other one is also exploratory interrogation as well. Explanatory interrogation. So to ask the students to ask questions why and how for a particular concept. They are doing that. So I think those are fairly scalable, don't require any technology or anything, but they are shown both to have lots of promise and it could be done. And then even additional things that could be done is that research showed that it's a good thing that is increasing this kind of, I was talking about judgmental learning, that's really poor point, less than 0.3 correlation with the actual students' judgment. This is actual third-party judgments of their own learning outcomes, is if you ask first to summarize what they are doing themselves, not ChatGPT to summarize for them. And then they receive also feedback. And then they ask them to answer particular questions, and then they get the feedback on it. As incredible increase in the quality of judgmental learning. That's basically one of the techniques that John Landowski was talking about even in 2007. It was experimentally shown to increase us to accuracy that is over 0.09. Yeah, 0.9, sorry. So that's basic number one. Number 2, with ChatGPT, it's really a tricky one. I don't think we really have much great evidence on some of these things. The problem is that I had this hypothesis, and I'm working on this in my head, a paper which will hopefully go, is that they will have 2 or 3 key critical hypotheses we need to work in educational psychology or cognitive psychologies. Is that one of them is that basically fluency is not a bliss. It's so deceptive to our cognitive needs that the moment you see something that is so highly coherently written that we go almost onto autopilot and we take it for granted. There was a recent statement about Terence Tao, which is Australian-American mathematician who was a prodigy in mathematics. He said that the papers that are now processed by ChatGPT take him far longer time to evaluate. that generative AI doesn't have the current architecture that's based on transformer models, doesn't have the means to detect the falsehood or not, right? And so the question is, who can detect that falsehood? Experts can. But it will require also themselves, as we talked about Ernst Tower, to invest far more cognitive resources to do it. And then the question is that we need to probably then connect these technologies with some other technologies as well. You said maybe use two language models. I think it's a good point. I think in many cases people are, last month or so were laughing at Gemini. I personally prefer Gemini for many reasons, because information inside of it, in many cases, when I ask about David Carless, they'll be usually much more up to date than it would be with ChatGPT, who can put David Carless to be professor. I don't know if, right? So it doesn't have. So it's kind of much more connected with that type of things. And there is another thing that is growing movement as well about kind of that kind of reliability that is kind of connecting these transformer architectures with something which is called knowledge graphs, which are actual facts, all much more older school AI. That doesn't bring us anything to the human judgments, right? I think that really kind of my view is that I would suggest the following, building on the first point, is asking some of these exploratory explanation, and maybe you think about including additional questions. How? Why? Why so? So in a way that students find the actual evidence, why so is working that way. So that the students can actually find the second type of evidence that is supporting the reasons that are explaining that information there. My view is that their evaluative judgment is likely going to be increased in that particular situation. But that's just a hypothesis.
Yes, Josh?
Thank you very much. My question is about your platform, FLoRA. So I wonder whether or not FLoRA supports multimodal feedback, like allows students and teachers to deliver and receive feedback in other modes like audio and video. And I wonder if yes, and how, if no, and why, and do you have any plan to upgrade your platform? Thank you.
That's a terrific question. I've had this idea for more than 5 years now. I have this colleague at Monash University, Neil Selwyn. I told Neil, we need to run a study which will be basically using deep fakes. So I can basically put the text that is generated here with GPT or something into my mouth. Because some of the research is also showing. I never managed to get the resources to run that study, but I think some people will start soon, hopefully, to run these type of things. Look, I think we have ideas to run that, and we would like to implement that. I think it will be really interesting, but we have also relatively limited development team. Sinu can tell you how hard he is working, and also a few other development resources. We would like to see that. I really like to see kind of this generative AI that is producing text equally, so can also be put into the generation of my face or the teacher that is in the classroom, right? So it can become the things. Now that I think the first study that I would do to kind of experiment is the extent to which students appreciate it or not. We've seen in the past studies were showing that students were appreciating having some of these multimodal formats of feedback much more because they can see even much more personal connection. The issue is though that we have in the literature so far is that students or people in general, they usually when you ask them if they don't know who produced a particular piece of content, AI or human, they don't make any more difference. However, the moment you disclose that something is produced by AI, they trust less. And so then the extent to which that trust relationship will be held if we were trying to produce that multimodality and the implications that we learned about multimodal feedback when humans were doing that by themselves onto this type of generative AI type of things is yet to be explored. So I'd love to see more studies on that topic before we can actually say this is good practice to do. Technically, it can be done, but we need to think about the practical implications, what teachers can benefit from and students.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I watched your lecture from last year, and really impressive. Actually, read the book you have recommended. So I'm really interested in the analysis of writing in your study. Really impressive. You use the AI feedback and the human feedback. And in your lecture, if I catch it right, you think the AI feedback actually can improve the essay better. So my questions will be, but also if the human feedback, after listening to the human feedback, students involved or engage with the materials deeper. Is that right?
Yes.
But why is that? Why is like AI feedback improve the essay better, but the human feedback? And also, I'm thinking using the AI feedback to facilitate teachers to give formative feedback to students. Whether I can use, whether the AI feedback will be available for the teachers as well.
That's a terrific question. Terrific question. And so probably I need to put also some clarity. In our study, when we talk about improvement of the students' essay with the AI condition, the AI condition was ChatGPT. So it's not necessarily just the feedback. So the students were asking questions. ChatGPT was also generating lots of sentences for them. Also, students were saying, oh, I wrote these 2 sentences, make it better connection between them. And then ChatGPT would also just generate 2 sentences, rewrite these 2 sentences to make a better connection between them. So in a way, they were actually using GPT to do lots of also writing for them, right? Small snippets of that, so in a way it was in a true sense that kind of collaboration between them and GPT. So you can say that they were more productive. The question though is, at the end, they didn't have better knowledge, they didn't learn more from these, they just perform better. And I would even suspect that in the long term, what they know about the subject versus those who deeply engaged would be probably shorter lived, right? So that's basically one of the kind of the things is the issue is that in that kind of generative AI, or they use ChatGPT, just basically for very utilitarian. Ija was showing, and I didn't include that beautiful also eye tracking data he was saying, showing is that students will be reading something, they say, oh, what is this? And they basically drop in the quick question. GPT requires a few seconds to generate. They would continue reading, drop another question. They would have 3 or 4 of these responses in the meantime. GPT, they would not even read some of them. They would be basically just kind of dropping things into the environment. In a way, they were offloading everything onto the GPT. So in a way, almost every decision they would automate. And so then they may create a certain product, but we didn't test these essays, I think, for reliability of information, right? So trustworthiness of information as well. I think that's another important thing to consider. And I think longer term as well, we want to see the gain and the kind of retention of the argument that they make in that essay versus those who write it in the human condition. My hypothesis, the human condition will have much longer retention of the argument they put to their essay versus the AI condition. But that's to be tested.
So Dragan, thank you for your thought-provoking sharing. I was wondering, how do you decide what indicators to be recorded by the system so as to give students guidance on their SRM skills?
And that's a really, really good question. He just spent his entire postdoc in University of Edinburgh, 3.5 years working on it. Right? Well, not quite entire, but at least first 2 years. So what we did is basically, and behind us, FLoRA, we have multiple. We record all the mouse movements. We record all the keystrokes time. In the lab settings, first 2 years, we're also doing lots of work in the lab. We also record their eye movements, and then we ask them to think aloud as they were working on these things. So then, from theory, we started to create small rules to ask if students are kind of opening the instruction page and at the start of the study, and then quickly going into some of the readings, but they don't spend much time in that reading and reading and going back to the instructions and then going again back to some of that. We would basically call that as orientation, process of self-regulated learning. Then we corroborated that with information from think alouds, right? And then we basically did 2 studies like that where we tried to validate more and more and more, right? And so that's how we are basically making these inferences about the processes of self-regulated learning. Students are engaging, but they are working with FLoRA, right? And then the next step for us was also, once we identified these steps, we want to see what it's meaningful. Do really students at the start of their learning more engage in orientation? At the end, they're engaging much more in elaboration and organization of their knowledge. And then we again tested that, and we found indeed it is. So it gives us basically several accounts that are supporting our validity argument that we were trying to make, or validity claim that we were trying to make as part of the process. Does that address your question?
Yes, very good. Sounds a lot of work.
It was a lot of work, but it was it was supposed to be a 3-year project, ended up being a 4-year project. I'd say thanks to the pandemic, because they gave us more resources as well, the funder, and it turned out to be actually required 4 years rather than 3 years.
Did you guys like publish a break or something that we can read?
Yes, so we had the paper about this kind of self-regulated learning protocol, that measurement, etc. It was published in the last issue of Metacognition and Learning in 2022. Ijo Fan is the first one.
I found this technology very fascinating. And I was just wondering, I actually have 3 small questions. The first one is, in what context do teachers use this technology? Second is, how does it influence e-learning? And third one is, what drives school adoption of the technology?
Great questions, every single one. So what kind of tasks? It's usually, what we so far seen, it's been used in a kind of in the classroom, where students would basically have a design task for them. Some of them would just focus on, and initially we would kind of be thinking, and I think in many cases, reading comprehension is really difficult for many learners. So that's why using all these tools like highlights, etc. And then I was talking about this kind of asking students when they're highlighting and identifying important concepts, you can ask students to think about self-explaining that concept, or answering questions why and how, or some of these. So ask the students to identify key concepts and answer for these key concepts why and how. That could be one way to do it, right? So that's basically just one part of the kind of reading comprehension. Then we had other classes where they wanted students to work on a specific writing exercise, mostly a formative assessment type of a thing. So then students would come in and they would usually be asked to work on this task for about 40 minutes. So they would need to read some information and they need to produce an essay, right? So that's basically most of the cases what we found so far. We have seen also in some of the higher education situations, students would give more of a choice to use FLoRA or not. I would not do that. I would probably not even do that in the early stages of higher education. In schools, not definitely, I would scaffold them much more. So in the schools, they would basically scaffold them properly, give them kind of explanation of everything. In higher education, I would give them more choice, and I would ask them to write a particular essay based on the information they would actually collect, even the readings that are in course and even outside, right? So that was basically done in that way. We also found situations they would actually use multiple classes. They would actually have this, and they would primarily use it as a formative feedback exercise, right, for the students. Build on more and more and more, kind of, there was some of the classes on students' communication, right? Skills and the writing skills as well. They would basically, every week, they would engage into additional writing thing that is improving their communication. Implication on e-learning. Terrific question. Most of learners, as I said, don't have great skills to learn. So these type of tools should long-term be thinking about how we can actually help learners to better be organized. Many learners do not really are very well organized in the learning, right? So that requires like precise organization, timely work, etc. a platform like this can actually lead into that kind of helping you to be better organized as part of the process. And that's basically the precondition for being effectively a learner, right? That's that answer. And the third question is why and what is driving school adoption of some of these things? It's a really terrific question. I think school adoption is not just a technology, right? Schools are driven by real world needs. So they basically live in real world. So they have all their stakeholders. They have the government that sets the standards. They have the parents that have the expectations. And yes, there are students as well who have a voice as well. In many cases, schools really have certain questions or things that they need to improve. Reading comprehension is often an issue. So they want to, and that would be, I think, one important thing. And then also teachers to be able to help and get deeper insight into how students are comprehending that information. Because FLoRA itself can and already has certain dashboards. So the student, they can understand for every student what is that learning signature, how they're engaging with their learning. And likewise for writing. I think that a society like yours in Hong Kong, where you are, many of you are even trilingual, right? Not only bilingual, but trilingual. And so being trilingual is not easy. So you need to basically school priorities and what I need to do. That's number one. We can now engage into the whole kind of discourse about the adoption of technology in a school. And we can, if that's interesting, I can have lots of chat. You have to have certain champions, you have to have a priority and everything that is there, etc. I studied, there are lots of also understanding of the daily politics of the school, not big politics. I'm not talking about government. School daily politics, like what are the kind of what is going on in the school.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing a study on that compared students' help-seeking behaviors with ChatGPT and with human experts. Actually, recently I've been thinking about doing research comparing students' interaction with ChatGPT and with human writing teachers in seeking and uptaking feedback in writing. Because you may have noticed that there are already some studies comparing students' perceptions and uptake of ChatGPT feedback and teacher feedback in writing. But in most cases, they just generate feedback from ChatGPT and from human teachers and provide this feedback to students and examine their perceptions of such feedback and their uptake. In my view, the most significant advantage of ChatGPT in providing feedback to students is that students can interact with ChatGPT. For example, when they do not quite understand a particular piece of suggestion, they can ask ChatGPT to clarify the suggestion, and then they can consider whether or not they want to uptake that feedback. So I want to do a study comparing students' interaction with ChatGPT and also their interaction with teacher. But in teachers' practices, they actually they do not have a lot of time to sit together with their students and discuss their writing and provide feedback. But I know that some teachers apply a way called student-teacher conferencing, like they sit together face-to-face or by Zoom or other online tools, and they discuss their writing in depth, and so that students can obtain some feedback from the teachers. So I want to compare. I want to know if are there any differences when students interact with ChatGPT with their teachers in seeking feedback in writing?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, in our study we did that, but the kind of interface was chatbot. So in addition to kind of these chat, like I was focusing primarily because the argument for me it was self-regulated learning, but Idra can tell much more about that study because he knows the data by heart. And the key thing is for that, that students actually saw ChatGPT as a utility. And even when we asked them about the values of that, they basically felt much more autonomous to ask whatever random question. They didn't feel judged. When they were basically doing and asking teacher, they felt judged immediately, right? In a way. And they also had a different approach. They had even different expectations. When they were asking teacher, they never expected from the teacher to give them the words or to give them the sentences. With ChatGPT, they had no issues to ask the sentences or the words, right? So there are basically kind of that simply they see ChatGPT as a utility and have no barriers with it. With the teacher, there are social norms that need to be expected, and they are basically deeply enculturated as part of the process. So I think that's something that I'd like to see even more. I'm not studying, I'm mostly looking into these things through a cognitive lens, but I think sociocultural lens to these type of studies would be also quite useful to consider.
Could you please share more details about the study comparing students' help-seeking behaviors, the study you shared just now, like the research context, data analysis, and collection analysis techniques?
Yeah, we basically, it's a very long study. So I think probably the entire talk could be around this study alone.
Maybe we can sort of
Maybe.
get some of the papers.
Yeah.
It's submitted, but not published.
Not published yet. So, the study was basically done in the context of, I think the subject was AI in education. We had students to learn about it. The task was basically given to the students undergrad students in higher education. The students were basically asked to produce an essay based on the readings about the future of education or education 2030, right? So they have some level of vision, right? And so the study itself would start initially with some prior knowledge tests, and it would also look into certain other surveys. So we use this slide that is looking at the students' knowledge of metacognition, as well as students' motivation judgments. They would ask them to read and write for 2 hours. And they would stop. We had a brief interview about their experience and everything. Then they would have a bit of a rest as well, 2 hours of work. And then they would continue after that for another hour to revise their essay. And then 1 hour basically would be randomized into 4 conditions as we studied. And one of those conditions was with teacher chat. We had the whole interface. So our platform can be used also for chats with teachers, and they can easily see the entire essay, they see everything students are doing. And then another one was ChatGPT condition, right? And we compare these. And then again, after the end of the study, we collected basically all these mouse movements, clicks, etc. We converted into the processes of self-regulated learning. We also collected for some of the students eye tracking data, but we could not for all because it's so much, it's too long. So we crashed our software for eye tracking data multiple times because they are designed to last for 3 hours, right? And then we basically then collected again and again some post-knowledge tests. We also collected the data about their post-study interview as well with them. And then we analyzed statistically all these links, prior knowledge, etc., essay, coded essays as well, assessed them. We had a rubric for the essays. And we even had the interviews that were recorded for many different aspects. One of them is for different judgment values and value attributions and students with that.
Just a very quick question. The interesting thing is how humans interact with humans compared to humans interact with machines, right? And I saw in one of your slides you were showing Monash work, and it talks about the co-regulation as well as the socially shared regulation. So in that work, is the co-regulation or socially shared regulation with machines or with humans and machines?
Terrific question. Inga's framework builds on Sandy Arbella and Alison Hadley's framework on socially shared regulated learning. But for all these levels, there is also machine, right? So socially shared with the machine, and so socially shared regulation is sharing of your regulation or monitoring with other equally competent so your peer, and plus also AI.
Right. So in that, in the studies that they're designing, they would include both humans and machines.
Exactly. exactly. And I want to basically say, I didn't say that on our horizon as well, but you already developed is that writing can be collaborative. So,
Yeah,
but
that's
both
right.
human.
So the FLoRA is at the moment, say, for example, the annotation, the notes and so on, they are individuals.
At the moment, but we basically have easy functionality to expand it to become shared across the students. And also we have the whole editor now that is available and students can actually collaborate on that. That is
So
plus also chat.
at the moment, they can already collaborate.
So that feature, so we basically have that feature is finished, right?
Finished about is like we will probably use it in.
Need to be tested, right?
Because that's actually, I think in terms of developing self-regulation, how do you sort of develop the metacognitive aspects? Having a kind of like a human partner to talk about it, probably would be a big boost, I mean, one hypothesis.
Absolutely, and that could also maybe address David's first or second question that I asked, like, when you have multiple people as well, and ask everybody's judgments as part of the process, and then come up to the same conclusion.
Right. So we've come to exactly 5:30. So far, we haven't got any questions from our online participants. So in this case, let us all thank Dragan for, I think, good.